I went to Afghanistan late 2001, part of Task Force Dagger. I took a company of Green Berets supporting Task Force Dagger downrange. So from December of '01 to December of '02. Well, while I was downrange, I was the Advanced Operations Base commander in East Central Afghanistan. I owned the region. And at that time, 2002, it was only a special operations fight.
Welcome to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. I'm your host, Rich Nance. Here we'll take a deep dive into firearms culture and the Second Amendment lifestyle. From hunters to veterans, competitive shooters, police officers, tactical trainers, 2A advocates, and even some well-known celebrities, we'll cover it all. Today we're sitting down with Randy Watt. He's a retired colonel with the Utah National Guard. He led the 19th Special Forces Group. He's also a retired chief of police from Ogden, Utah. He has a ton of experience in both the law enforcement and military arenas. He's going to join us today for a podcast that you're not going to want to miss. Stay tuned. Good morning, Randy. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to see you, Rich. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you.
So you have so much going on. I kind of want to start from the beginning for people that may not be familiar with you, because you have quite a story, not just as a high-level police administrator and, of course, a trainer and everything else, but also a ton of really high-level military experience. And I know you're a very humble guy, but tell us a little bit about what happened first. Were you a cop first, and then you went into the military, or how did that happen?
Yeah. So I grew up in the home of a World War II hero. My father was he was American, grew up in the United States, in Kansas, and wanted to go to war before the U.S. Wanted to send him. He was a pilot at 16, so he had a lot of hours. And so he went up to Canada, Royal Canadian Air Force. Most people don't know this, but 36,000 Americans fought in World War II in the Canadian Armed Forces. And he went over flying Spitfires and then transitioned to bombers. Was shot down on his 18th bombing mission over Germany, captured, spent 2.5 years in German prison camp, escaped 3 times, got away on his 3rd. So I always had of course, as a kid growing up, my dad was one of those quiet guys, but he participated in something called the Great Escape in Stalag Luft 3 and Zagen, Poland, in the prison camp. And so occasionally he would go give talks and he would do things. People would come do an interview with him. And so growing up, he kind of had that environment. I grew up in Canada because he stayed in the aviation industry, and was born and raised in Canada. Wanted to be a law enforcement officer, except, and Rich, you know me, I'm 5'6" tall. And in the late 70s, there were height requirements in Canada for law enforcement. Most agencies were 5'10", a few were 5'8", but no one was 5'6" in those days. And so I had dual citizenship because of my parents. My mom was from the U.S. also. And so I moved to Utah to go to school, and I was going to Weber State College in Ogden, Utah, and found out the police department was hiring and thought I'd give it a run. Thought I'd probably get canceled out because I wasn't very tall, but I got hired. They didn't care about height. I was 21 and a half, and it was 1979. So that's how long it's been. It's 1979. I hired on the police department. Now, in the police department at that time, probably very similar to your police department in California when you hired on, but there were a lot of Vietnam veterans. And some of my trainers, some of my sergeants were Vietnam veterans. There were even a few Korean War veterans. And I enjoyed being around veterans. So I was a physically fit kid. I had wrestled up through my first 2 years of college. I had been into martial arts since I was about 13. And so anyway, a couple of these guys were members of the Utah National Guard, 19th Special Forces Group. I didn't know there was such a thing as the Guard, and I didn't know there was such a thing as Special Forces, Green Berets in the National Guard. And so I'd been on the department about 18 months when they talked me into recruiting, and there are a lot of benefits to doing so. So I enlisted in the Utah Army National Guard, 19th Special Forces Group. Went away for about a year and a half for all the initial training on a leave of absence from the PD, and got all the qualifications out of the way. Then came back, went on with both careers, working side by side as guardsmen, reservists do. When in special forces, there are a lot more periods away because of all the certifications and things we have to maintain. And then about 8.5 years into it, one of my commanders in the 19th group convinced me to become an officer. So I went through infantry OCS and then went back to the Q course again as an officer, and got qualified as an officer and had a great career. I was a commander at a company and battalion and at group. When I retired, I was a colonel. I started as a private, retired as a colonel, commanding the 19th Special Forces Group, 2,500 Green Berets across 9 states, and 3 trips to the war, leading counterterrorism, counterinsurgency units. And my last tour in 2011, 10 and 11 in Iraq, I was the J5, the strategic plans chief for the counterterrorism headquarters for the whole region, conducting long-range and strategic planning to accomplish the combatant commander's objectives and the President of the United States objectives as relates to counterterrorism. We had about 500 kills and captures of key personalities through that time, that little over a year that I was on the ground there in that position. Then in 2015, I retired from the Army National Guard. And so those 2 careers, and it was 2011, I retired from the police department with 32 years, was gone 5 years, and then the police department kind of got in condition that the city wasn't happy with it. So in late 2016, the mayor showed up at my corporate office. As you know, I have a private company, and asked what it would take to get me to come back, and he was pretty persuasive. So I went back for 4 years as chief. So I had 36 years total with the Ogden Police Department, and the first string was 32. Then I was gone for 5 years, and I was back for 4. Retired 4 years ago in 2021, and I've been hanging out with guys like you ever since.
Well, I apologize for that, but Randy, you have just a ton of irons in the fire still. You're still doing so much, but I don't want to leave the background yet, because most of us, if we have a law enforcement or a military background, it's either or. You have the unique perspective to have 2 careers that ran, congruently. Was the police department pretty gracious about allowing you to do this? And quite frankly, do they have a choice, or do they have to allow you to have leave for military training like that?
Well, I was fortunate in that my police department, 157 sworn, 225 employees, but my police department and my city have always been supportive of guardsmen reservists. Not all cities, not all police departments are. And yes, they have to by the letter of the law, but they can make your life miserable. I had a friend at a neighboring police department, the largest police department in our state. He was a colonel in the Army when he retired. He was a patrolman at that police department. And they told him up front, as long as you're in the Guard Reserves, we're not going to promote you. And they didn't. He would take promotional exams and they wouldn't promote him.
Wow.
And so you have worst case scenarios. I find that most police departments, particularly in the last 20, 25 years, since right before the war and then after the war began, have been pretty patriotic and supportive, because it's a reality, and particularly in these times of manpower and hiring stress, you want to get and retain who you can.
Sure, especially someone that has a lot of experience and a lot of training. And another thing that goes hand in hand with that is, if the police department is smart, they will allow you to go and get this training and experience and bring it back and teach it to the troops that can help make them safe, help make the population that they serve safer. I just think it's all around a great thing. I've talked to some former SEAL team guys and stuff that during times when there wasn't a war, one of them mentioned to me something I thought was an interesting quote. He goes, "I thought I was a part of the LA Sheriff's department, for so long because they train so much together. But in times where there's no war, I think military units are learning from law enforcement, and I think just the opposite. Over the last, since 9/11, it's been the opposite. Whereas law enforcement is benefiting from what these military personnel are experiencing overseas.
Yeah, and that I will tell you that at various times it goes both ways. I can tell you very early on because, I went to Afghanistan late 2001, part of Task Force Dagger. I took a company of Green Berets there, Bravo Company, 1st of the 19th Group, as part of Task Force Cobra support Task Force Crossbow, supporting Task Force Dagger downrange. So from December of 01 to December of 02. Well, while I was downrange, I was from late March, early April of 2002 to October when I left to begin the process of returning home. I was the Advanced Operations Base commander in East Central Afghanistan. I owned the region. I was in charge of all special operations in that region. And at that time, 2002, it was only a special operations fight. There were not, large contingents of conventional army were starting to come in and were starting to shift and take over pieces of ground, but it was still a special ops fight. And so I owned Host Province, part of Paktia Province, part of Paktika Province, and I had 4 Special Forces A teams spread out through the region, about 500 Afghan militia spread out, and I owned that region. But I was also co-located with a Black Side unit, and as a result of a number of factors, a strange thing happened with us. And that was that the Black Side unit began working jointly with us on certain operations. And so there were times when I was ground force commander on specific combat ops that I was accompanied by some of these Black Side guys. In fact, we're still friends today, and 23 years later. And very early on, one time we were engaged and we were doing our thing, and Dark Side guy came up and says, "Sir, we can assist here. We can handle it if you will, maintain perimeter and cover and suppress the enemy's fire. We'll maneuver down there and we'll make entry and we'll take care of this." And I kind of looked at him and we had kind of a short, funny conversation. And I said to him, "Sergeant Major, my mission is to locate and destroy enemy forces. I've located them. They're down there. Destroy them. I've got heavy weapons. I've got air on the way. I've got a number of things. Why would you want to enter into that structure against guys that are heavily armed, already know we're here and are going to engage you? You're going to lose some personnel and we don't need to do that." That's essentially paraphrasing the conversation. And it was kind of interesting. But if you think back in the history of those guys, up to this war, what was their primary mission? Their primary mission, direct action, heavily in hostage rescue. Well, what is that? That's approach, breach, enter, clear, kill, and return. And so that culture pervaded the mindset. Well, a few little operations after that, it was an 8-man element. They all came to see me and I said, "Talk to us about what you're doing." And essentially what I laid out, what Rich, is a barricade operation, right? And you and I know that from our SWAT days as a barricade operation, surround and call out and deal with consequences. So you saw this shift and they learned from it. And then, we all learned from that. You take a look at the first Battle of Fallujah, and I was not in Iraq then. I was in Iraq about a year and a half later. But you look at the first Battle of Fallujah, and the Marine Corps had forgotten some very important lessons that they learned during the Battle of Hue in Vietnam about urban fighting. And we had a very high body count because they were simply, crashing doors and running into rooms where guys are set up in positions, fighting positions, and there's pretty high body count. So then you look, but the Marine Corps and the infantry units that were involved in the first Battle of Fallujah, and Special Ops, they learned rather rapidly. And then you fast forward a year and a half, 2 years later, the second Battle of Fallujah, and the enemy had a high body count, and we had relatively small body count because we adapted our our tactics back to that concept of how to properly clear buildings of armed of people, and how to move down streets, how to go building to building rather than staying out in the open, moving down streets, how to use cross cover instead, how to use a variety of different tactics. And I will tell you that the special ops guys, the dark side special ops guys in particular, and the SF guys, were key to teaching and training and demonstrating to the conventional forces how to do these things.
I bet. It's strange how things change, because I remember as a new SWAT cop, we were doing basically like moving at the speed of like a high risk warrant service and everything. And we're just putting ourselves in harm's way so that the bad guys don't flush dope, right? And me being a California cop, drugs basically got decriminalized. So at some point along the way, several years ago, for most agencies, some were kind of straggling to catch up, but we went to more of the slow and deliberate search tactics versus the what's actually more fun to do, the dynamic stuff. But that's there's a place for that, but certainly we were using more of a dynamic entry in situations where, now looking back, it would have been much safer to have done a slow and deliberate type search. Which brings me to another question I had, Randy. How was the training when you first became a cop and you were new to the National Guard? So what was the training like between law enforcement, particularly I'm talking about firearms training, but also maybe, unarmed combatives type training as well. But how was the training different when you started in law enforcement versus the military?
Well, so when I started in law enforcement, 1979, this was pre-Tennessee versus Garner, right? So, I mean, Tennessee versus Garner, if I remember correctly, was 1982.
No fleeing felon rule, which means
we shot you.
A felon fleeing, you can shoot him.
We shot you.
Yeah.
And I say that a bit facetiously, but because it was kind of true. I mean, my first shooting I was in 1981, but it was with an armed robbery suspect. 45-minute running on foot gun battle across territory. 80-something rounds fired between all of us. He shot 2 cops, wounded 2 cops during this gun battle. Our tactics, 1979, 1980, 1981. I mean, we're in this period where tactics are just beginning to be understood and applied to law enforcement. This is the days, 1980, 1981, Caliber Press comes out with Street Survival, and you get those guys who are, they see this is, we're trying to shape and influence things, and so they create the Street Survival seminars, So in the early 80s, I remember attending this, and it's just kind of opening your eyes. But the thing for me was, I was a private in the infantry school, and infantry tactics are not that far removed. I mean, other than suppressive fire, which is not a law enforcement concept, no matter who tells you that. Directed fire is, but that's a different animal. But, so suppressive fire, other than suppressive fire, how you move, under fire, how you move during a movement to contact, how you apply a number of skills, how you apply Overwatch, how you have buddy team coverage, and how you do those things. I'm looking at this street survival stuff, and I'm saying, this is kind of what we do in the infantry with some adjustments, some nuance. So I literally became overnight I got moved to the training bureau in the early 80s, and I was sent to the States arrest control instructor course in school, and a guy that I as I recall, you knew or knew of, Bob Koga from LAPD. The Koga method had come big into my state, and so being a martial artist of some renown at that time, traveling around fighting in different tournaments, the different international events like Diamond Nationals and those kinds of things, Long Beach Nationals. Departments naturally said, "Hey, look, you're going over there because we want to develop this arrest control concept," and so I attended Bob Koga's instructor courses over the years, over the next 2-3 years, and got involved in that. And so you saw this through the early 80s, through the 80s and into the early 90s. You saw this what I would call a radical increase in individual officer training, particularly survival training, um, come into vogue. And then you saw the mid 90s to the late 90s, and then into the 2000s. You saw this piece come in where people began to think the cops were getting the wrong training and it was getting too violent, and we were applying.
I remember the whole, warrior versus guardian
Oh
nonsense.
yeah, all
and
that
was
nonsense about
that
words.
may have been after that period you're talking about, but it could have started back then. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Well, in around very early 2000, you had a book about SWAT cops come out. I can picture. Let me in a minute. I'll think of the guy's name, but he was a professor of law enforcement, I think in Eastern Missouri University or something. And he wrote this very negative book about SWAT, the militarization of SWAT.
Yeah.
And if you remember that terminology, the militarization. So guys like me who are highly skilled by now in military tactics and skill sets, I was a graduate of a number of very specialized special forces schools, combat related schools, including what we used to call hand-to-hand, but became combatives. But more importantly, things like Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat, and those kinds of courses. And we were bringing training to people. We became people to be concerned about. And I remember one day had been in my fourth shooting, and it's just the guys at the department called me a crap magnet.
And Randy, to interrupt you, was that your fourth shooting? Were those domestically law enforcement? Wow,
law enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it was 1993. I think it was. So anyway, so I just I'm about to testify. I've been brought in by the county attorney, and he's talking about this event, and he said, "That must have been crazy for you." And I says, "It's not my first rodeo." And he said, "What?" I said, "Well, actually, this is my fourth shooting." And his eyes went wide, and he said, "Oh, don't say that. Don't say that to anybody. Don't let anybody know that. Oh, we can't have that. We can't have an officer involved in that many shootings." And I'm just going, "What?" I didn't choose these. And you saw this crossover. I will tell you that, a lot of that I brought, because of that specialized training, I brought things to the department. So it was natural that about the mid to late 80s, as I recall, they moved me from the firearms unit to the SWAT unit. And then I was promoted to sergeant right among there. So suddenly I'm the SWAT sergeant. And I've been instructed by the department to take SWAT to the proper level. Our SWAT team had started on a federal grant in 1974. They sent 5 guys to the mecca of SWAT knowledge, Quantico, Virginia, the FBI school, and they came back and but that model was no longer effective, and the chief said, "Look, we want to get modernized, and so here you go. Here's a budget. Here's stuff." And we created one of the first regional SWAT teams. That concept, regional SWAT teams, it became a model. 1995, I started teaching for the National Tactical Officers Association. It's been 30 years this year, and I did a lot of writing for them on their On Leadership column. I was the leadership chair for 8 years, and I wrote 32 issues of On Leadership for the Tactical Edge magazine. So all those things kind of came together as a result of these 2 careers running side by side. Developing skill sets.
There's no other way you're going to get that much experience in that time frame except for doing both, and that's very interesting. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the mentality difference between maybe being a special forces soldier and a police officer here in the U.S. But before I get to that, let's talk just a little bit, Randy, about equipment and how equipment and technology has evolved over the years. For instance, I used to be a canine handler, and I had a dog that was trained for both apprehension and drug detection. And so that was obviously deterrent, right? Not a lot of people ran from me when you have this German Shepherd, gnashing his teeth and everything and barking. But now a lot of times we have, and I don't mean there's not still a place for canines in law enforcement, but for instance, now we have these drones that are very accessible, which back in the day, we never even dreamt of having that. We might have a helicopter if one was available, but to have on every shift, the police department I just retired from has a drone officer. And so they got them in the back of the cars. They can even deploy them even in SWAT applications. And it's a way that you can get, eyes on without risking, having people inside of this structure. So talk a little bit about how over the years you've seen maybe not just tactics change, but also technology benefit both the soldier and the police officer.
So yeah, I mean, I started in law enforcement where the radio was in your car. And when you got out of your car and you locked the door behind you, when you got out of your car, it was you. Wow. And whatever happened, right? And then couple of years into it, we got walkie-talkies, and
they were probably like this big, right?
Oh, they were
like 6 pounds, 6 pounds or something.
So, and we had a nightstick, and you might have a Remington 870 pump shotgun with wood furniture, and you were allowed to carry 4 buckshot rounds up the tube. Remember that they handed out buckshot in 5-round boxes. So in your glove box, you had a cardboard box with 1 round in it because you're only allowed to 4 up the tube. Yeah. And I mean, that was it. And I look at what we have today. I look at what we built, what we came through, because as SWAT commander in particular, I was involved in improving the team on a regular basis and doing a lot of stuff with the NTOA. I was fortunate to be exposed to a lot of growing technology in the tactical world. I mean, I still remember we used to break chem lights when we were doing slow and deliberate clears in a darkened environment. We'd break chem lights and throw them out in front of us into rooms and then try to see. And now my SWAT team have all got night vision, just like the military, on their helmets. And they've got PEC 15s on their firearms, so they can use IR. They can go completely blacked out. And you look at that transition over time. Well, a good deal of that came from the military. And the reason it did was the military was developing these skill sets. Guys are bringing it back. But if you recall, in the initial days with the military, it was quite expensive. Well, at various times during the war, as the need for things began to slow down, and particularly now today, the military isn't buying these big packages of particularly individual soldier kit because they've developed it to a point where it is. So they needed, if they're going to continue to make money, they needed an additional customer base. And when law enforcement first started through the federal surplus program, getting, A and PVS 5s, when the military is using PVS 14s, 3 generations ahead, you got this surplus equipment coming in through the federal programs. You got
gently used, I'm sure, right? Just gently used.
Yeah. And so everything. I remember when we got our first Starlight, Vietnam era Starlight scope, and that big clunky thing was put on top of a accurized M14 semi-automatic rifle, and that became a tactical weapon. So you saw this evolution, and as the military experimented and developed, and as the private corporations supporting the military did, those things began to find their way into law enforcement, where now you have, I see SWAT teams as I go about and do things, and as I talk to people that have more technology than they can learn how to properly use and effectively use.
I think sometimes having too many options is as detrimental as having not enough options. Whereas if you had, pepper spray, a baton, and a firearm, those were your options, except for hands on. Now you got a taser, you got these other things, you got crazy devices where you can shoot something at somebody and it wraps around their legs and, incapacitates them theoretically if they're standing, with their legs together. If you have too many options, it's just like martial arts, right? If you learn a complex martial art where you have 16 different ways to block a haymaker right hand punch. When that punch is coming, your brain is trying to cycle between. It's the old Hicks law, right? So the fewer choices you can have, the better. Within that's not a hard and fast rule. So you do want to make sure you have options. And I think the higher trained you are, the better trained you are, the more options you can have. Like a boxer can have all kinds of different combinations he throws, but he's also training every day. So that's another thing I wanted to hit on, is where people think of SWAT as the elite of law enforcement, and I would argue that that's true. But you may have, like what I was on was a part-time SWAT team. So we trained once or twice a month, and we did a lot of operations and stuff for the city that we lived in, that we worked in. But there are guys who are also SWAT who are on full-time teams, and they're either training or serving search warrants or whatnot every day. So I know with the NTOA, they're trying to establish more of a standard and kind of a tiered system. If you have this much personnel, you're this type of team, and you could do these types of missions and all that. But yeah, so it's a big variance. But when someone hears SWAT, people need to keep in mind that, yeah, there may be elite operators on a small part-time SWAT team, but that's probably not going to be the norm. Probably a bigger team that's training more is going to overall have more capabilities.
Yeah, well, those standards do exist. I think the NTOA is on its third iteration of those over time as they've evolved. I was on the committee that developed the first set of national SWAT standards.
And I think, sorry to interrupt, Randy, but I think also that helped steer teams toward regionalizing, like you said, right?
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah, because you may not have the ability to be this tier of a team or to be capable of performing these missions unless now you join with two other agencies, and now instead of 15 guys, you got 45 people on your SWAT team, or whatever that. Yeah,
right. Yeah, and that was an important concept. I mean, it was establishing base numbers. I mean. Anyway, so you look at that process, that evolutionary process, and the NQA has been huge in it and met a lot of resistance at different times, but slowly over time, the reality has removed a great deal of that resistance. And then you have the proliferation of the state SWAT associations, and they're doing the same things. I mean, you look at some of the big ones. Ohio Tactical tends to be one of the largest associations and conferences, annual conferences. Texas Tactical, Cato in California holds a big, and so you bring in all these people together, and you're evolving things greater. Because you talk about skill sets. When you're learning, when we started martial arts, and both of us have studied multiple systems, so you're being exposed to more and more and more and more and more and more, and you're learning more and more techniques. And you pass a certain point, right? And you get to the point where the reality is, like me today, I've got 3 or 4 techniques, but I can apply them from in a whole different series of situations, and that's what I'm going to employ, right?
Absolutely.
I've seen. I see a lot of these videos, self-defense videos and things that happen on the street. And I've been on the street when these are that, but I've seen an overhand right solve a lot of problems,
Yes.
when it's set up properly with, and that overhand right comes in, and not much you can do about it.
And to your point, what I've never seen work is a perfectly executed rear wrist lock takedown, for instance. I'm not going to say it's never happened, but those control holds, they work well before this person is at a level of resistance where he's trying to fight you. He's trying to pull away. It's active resistance, but it's maybe not, he's not trying to fight you. And that's why I think sometimes as cops, we get complacent because we think, oh, I've won all these fights, I've never got hurt. You're not winning fights. You're taking people into custody primarily who are trying to pull away. And when you meet up with the guy who doesn't want to pull away, but instead he wants to take it out on you, he wants to fight you, that's when you're going to find out whether or not your defensive tactics, your arrest and control techniques are up to speed. And I learned as a pretty high level martial artist, I was doing some pretty complex stuff. And then once I became a police officer when I was 24 years old, I realized, yeah, the essence of martial arts works, but the complicated or advanced techniques, those are better left in the dojo, because the bad guy doesn't know he's supposed to go down if you do this certain, weird technique or whatever. There's no secrets. That's one of the things when I first started martial arts. I really thought, I want to learn these secret techniques to be able to, protect myself or whatever. The secret technique is, and I know you'd agree, is being aware of your surroundings, being physically fit, and understanding what it takes to deliver, unarmed blows with power, and of course being armed. I mean, that's kind of a all-encompassing way to make sure that you are as safe as you can be.
Yeah. So, we've reached a point in law enforcement because of technology that we rely on all these tools. And we learned in my department, right, when pepper came along, they sent me away to understand pepper spray. And so I, learned all about pepper spray. In fact, I was young and silly enough that, I got sprayed by 9 different kinds of brands of pepper spray to see what the different, alcohol versus water-based versus, and yeah, I would never be that stupid again. But so we bring pepper along. It's the next best thing, right? This is going to solve all our fight problems. And we found out, because we track stuff at my department, we found out pepper was about 38% effective in the field. That didn't go well, because now you still got to fight this guy, and now you got residual pepper in the air or on the person, and now it's on you and in your eyes, and yeah. So and then along comes first generation taser. First generation taser. Well, this is a new big thing. It's going to say. We look at taser now, and still today. I mean, when I was chief, I asked the Records Bureau, the Training Bureau, I'm sorry, to do research for me, and I want to know how effective are our tasers. And our tasers were effective 62% of the time. Well, what do you do for the other 38?
Yeah, exactly.
You're back to fighting some dude. And we
now
hadn't developed. Yeah, we had lost, before I came back as chief, we had lost a lot of our hands-on training.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
so when
the taser came around to our agency, it was first proposed as like, if you ask someone to stand up and they don't stand up, tell them you're going to tase them. And if they don't stand up, you tase them. That's pretty crazy, because it got to a point also where it was considered almost a deadly force response. So each agency kind of sets their own parameters on that. But yeah, in training, we'd have a guy against whatever type of threat that wasn't a firearm, and the guy would pull out his blue gun taser and say, taser, taser, and we would say, taser failed. And then now you see, oh my God, you mean I can't just point this magic wand at the bad guy and make him disappear? No, you still have to plan for that. In my experience, I think it's been about, and I've probably been involved with maybe 10 live taser deployments. A couple of them are mine. And like you said, 62% seems about reasonable. Heavy clothing. A lot of times too, the target zone with the first probe going basically level and the second probe going at a downward angle. If a guy's in a fighting stance, there's a good chance that second probe is going to hit the ground, and it'll make a lot of noise. And the guy might think he's being incapacitated, but he's not being, physiologically incapacitated. So yeah, but when it does work, it works like a charm. But yeah, you can't rely on that or any piece of equipment. You have to, I took a class one time at this training conference, and it was a guy who actually went on to work for Taser, but he said, this is actually a great quote. As a cop, your hands are your first and last line of defense. So at a low level, when you're maybe escorting somebody or whatever, and then in extreme high level threat situation where you can't get to anything else, that's all you got to be able to work your way to a better solution that's probably on your duty belt.
3 times in my career, the only thing left, I had to fight my way to a carotid control and apply it. Some agency call it lateral vascular neck restraint.
Yes.
We called it a carotid control. now it's against the law for a law enforcement officer to apply it in my state.
Isn't that crazy?
It is, because
yeah, I mean,
the only thing left to me, that was the only thing left between me shooting that individual
exactly.
or getting him into custody in some way without shooting them.
Exactly.
But I was good enough to fight my way to it and get it on correctly. And I mean, literally fight your way to it. But, you and I are 1/10 of 1%
Yeah.
of the skills,
Yes.
the people that are skilled to that level. So when they took away, and this is what I tried to tell the legislature in my state as a chief when they did this in reaction to the George Floyd, everybody jumped on that. I tried to tell them is you're taking away another technique that may prevent a shooting.
A life-saving tool.
Right. But no,
well,
didn't
Randy,
work.
Along those lines too, and I'm sure you would agree, there's this big emphasis on de-escalation, right? Well, cops are masters at de-escalation. If not, we would have all shot, I don't know, 30 people in our career. You know what I mean? If we weren't constantly trying to de-escalate. But you can de-escalate yourself right into a shooting. And I didn't come up with that, but I've heard someone say that, and it's very true. In other words, sometimes if you had taken decisive, less lethal action early on, and that could just be taking this guy to the ground, kneeing him in the abdomen, whatever, striking the side of his neck, you could control a situation without just backing up and pleading with this guy, sir, please do this, sir, please do this. Then next thing you know, you're on your back and you got your gun out and you're shooting this guy. Whereas if you had been decisive earlier on, you could have got by with a much less level of force. I
mean, there's a great deal of, there's a great deal of truth to that. But we have the culture has changed to the point where it's made even skilled officers very tentative about applying force. I mean, we used to talk about, protecting our officers. We had a responsibility to protect our officers, all right, against physical violence. And then we started talking about we need to protect them against the physical event plus the legal repercussions of that event. Now I say we got to keep them out of prison.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I think we're seeing, or definitely seeing in the last few days, we're definitely seeing a big swing back towards a more conservative view of law enforcement. But there's still laws in states and in places, and law enforcement officers are very tentative. And we're not, we're not hiring the same kinds of people we used to hire. They're not available. And so you can look at a whole spectrum. You can look across a whole spectrum of issues affecting law enforcement. And I don't think we're near as good as we used to be at solving the problems society wanted us to solve, because we're just not as skilled in it. More importantly, we don't have the mindset for it. And more importantly, society has bailed on us in terms of supporting us in a number of jurisdictions.
Yeah, and I think that, we can lose sight that I think the overwhelming majority of people support law enforcement. I really do. It's just not the ones we're typically dealing with. When I became a cop, I remember my dad saying, I don't know why you'd want to deal with the scum of the earth every day. And I'm thinking, oh, Dad, come on. No, he was absolutely right. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but you're dealing with the same small percentage of criminals, a high percentage of the time. And it can get you to where you're kind of suspicious of everybody, which is good in a sense, but it can also not be super mentally healthy. But I think that, law enforcement training has come so far over the years. I think with our agency, and I think nationwide, there's been much more of an integration between the empty hand skills or the arrest and control tactics and the firearms. When I first started, as I'm sure when you first started, there was the firearms guys and there was the defensive tactics cadre. And, they taught different stances, everything was different, until I think over the years we realized that it's all one fight. And what starts as a shooting, you may end up still having to fight the guy for your gun, or you may be in a physical fight, try to disengage, draw your pistol. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And I'm really quite thankful for the way that law enforcement training has improved in many ways over the years. There's also now a lot of simulators that can be very beneficial, right? That in conjunction with force on force, because then you're talking about the decision-making ability, which, whether you're military, law enforcement, or private citizen, that decision-making component is perhaps the most important and perhaps the most often neglected.
So there are three, over the years, I've distilled this down to this sort of formula, right? That there are, to me, when it comes to, let's say, a gunfight, there are three critical skills that have to occur. Skill number one, and they're in order of priority, right? Skill number one is making correct and in-time shooting decisions. Correct, meaning legally, ethically, morally the right thing to do. And in time, meaning I can process the scenario fast enough that I can get the firearm out by making correct decision rapidly enough that I get the firearm out and protect myself or other people, right? So that's number one, right? And number two is deliver timely and accurate rounds on target, sufficient to end the threat, right? And no more than are necessary. That's critical skill number two, right? Knowing when to stop shooting, being able to maintain visual and processing information rapidly enough to see. I'm dealing with a case, as you know, I do expert testimony stuff. I'm dealing with a case right now, reviewing a case right now where on video, body cam video, and witness video, on video, the gun from the suspect's hand is already on the ground as the two officers fired the last three shots, 1 and 2, right? Now, we can get long and involved in a discussion how fast the brain can process information, how soon it can translate to the end of the threat, the imminent threat likely or intended to cause serious bodily injury or death, and then send those signals to get this to stop, right? We can get long and involved in that, but here's the problem, right? The plaintiff's attorneys, and it's a civil suit, the plaintiff's attorney, wrongful death, the plaintiff's attorneys are going to play that video time and time again. They're going to slow that video down, and you're going to see the gun leaving the suspect's hand. You're going to hear continue firing. You're going to see the gun sitting on the ground as those final rounds are being fired. In the minds of a jury, I'm going to have a hard time. I'm going to make, if necessary, if it doesn't get settled, I'm going to make an argument about those things we just talked about, right? But in the minds of a jury, the gun was on the ground. And when they're delivering final shots. Now, in the autopsy report, which rounds actually killed? When was he technically dead, right? When, would it have actually, you get the point. So there's going to be all this stuff. But at the end of the day, the jury is going to be faced with, that when he let go of the gun, the cops should have stopped shooting.
Yeah, and I think that's
how do you overcome that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that people overestimate about technology is like a body cam or dash cam, that it's not going to give you the same decision-making dilemma that cop had in the moment, right? It doesn't show you how fast the cop's heart's beating when his camera is watching what's happening. He's facing a deadly threat. It doesn't show you, the time distortion and all these things that can occur, all these physiological effects of duress. So you can watch it and it's like watching a movie, right? Maybe you're even eating popcorn and drinking soda, right? But this cop, he doesn't know how it's going to end, and he doesn't know if he's going to be the one going home or not. So I think we need to keep that thing in perspective as well, which is, easier said than done. But Randy, what do you think about law enforcement agencies more and more going to red dot sights for their pistols? Of course, they've had red dot sights on carbines, patrol rifles for years. What do you think about the transition, I think by and large, to agencies across the country moving to red dots on pistols?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's an advantage. I'm a big fan of it. I began to transition to red dots on my pistols. It's been 6, 7, 8 years ago. When I took over as chief in my department, I moved us to red dots. I brought the guys from the LA Sheriff's Department Firearms Training Unit who nationally had become one of the experts because they do big studies, right? Everything they do, they study. And so I brought them up for 3 days to do to train all my instructors in the transition and red dots and all this stuff on them. So, and the reason I'm a big believer in them is you look at our historically, you look at our hit ratio, right? It's been debated about for years. When you combine it nationally, it's somewhere between 13 to 23% of our rounds hit the target. Well, it's not just because we're not the shooters we should be. I mean, it's not just because training per se. I've never shot anybody or shot at anybody who was ever standing perfectly still. Shootings are very dynamic. Moving targets are very hard. And if you're moving too, which I was in a number of situations, it just creates whole new dynamics in terms of making sure the sights are aligned on target, making sure the trigger press.
Yeah. The cop is almost always playing catch up. In other words, our role is reactionary. Right. So as much as we like to think we're proactive, we don't decide typically we're going to shoot this guy. No. It's him that decides it.
And it's a very psychologically stressful environment. So we have all these factors, and it's, some are nighttime, dim light, some are in crowded venues. You have all these different, so we have this miss ratio. But the one thing that we've always known over time, and you and I could get long and involved in this, and you could bring in, point shooting, instinctive shooting experts, and we could destroy their discussion points. The key is this, all right? The key is this, is that in order to effectively hit any target in any environment, the sights must be aligned on that target. And depending on the distance, you need to have a clear sight picture, right? Which means you were never truly able to clearly look at the target if you're using conventional sights, if you wanted to have a good hit ratio. Now with the red dot sight, the major thing that I really like about the red dot sight is some people call it target-based focus, some people call it threat-based focus, whatever it is. My focal distance, what I focus on is that target, and I get that optic between me and that target and that red dot, and I just let it float on the target. I don't look at the red dot, which is one of the harder parts of transition to red dots.
Absolutely.
Getting people to stop treating the front that dot as a front sight.
Yes. And once
you master that, right, you have a much better view.
Exactly.
Downrange of what that target is and what it's doing, because you're looking at it with binocular vision, with a target reference point superimposed on the target. It's not back here in front of me.
Yep.
It's on the target. And we're seeing signs, we're seeing data that says hit ratios are going up.
Yeah, I just saw a study like that where it was like 35 cases, which isn't a huge sample size, but yeah, the hit ratio was better for sure. I just think also too, like my eyes are not as good as they were like 5 years ago. And so even when I'm doing accuracy testing for a gun article or something, I just, maybe at 10 yards, 15 yards, it's not significant. But at 25 yards, when I'm trying to shoot a really tight group, I'm going to have a heck of a lot easier time with a red dot. And I think it's for the reasons you mentioned. I think under duress, most people, moderately trained people, are going to have a heck of a time focusing on their sights, because their focus is going to be on that thing that's standing in front of them that's threatening their life, right? So again, with a red dot, you're able to do what your body wants to do instinctively, which is to focus on the threat. And you can't help but see the dot because it's so prominent there. Now, there is a little bit of a learning curve, and you have to have a consistent draw stroke and all that stuff in order, so you're not having to hunt around for the dot. But I think once you get past that little learning curve, it's going to be tremendously advantageous. Doesn't mean there's not great shooters that don't use them, and I get that. If you're a great shooter with irons, then maybe you don't need a red dot.
So LA said that when they took groups that no shooting experience, and all over law enforcement, we get more and more of those, right? that when they trained people on red dot and then transitioned to teaching them how to use conventional sights, like their backup sights if their red dot failed, right? That they were much more accurate and learned more quickly with the conventional sights than if you reverse the process, trained them with conventional sights and then shifted them to red dots. Okay, so yeah, and I have personally found over time that as I worked with and learned and really developed that presentation necessary to be effective with the red dot, that when I turned the red dot off or I shifted to a firearm with conventional sights, my presentation put me on target with conventional sights
And
much
that's what's
better,
cool is you're not
much more
having to learn
cleanly.
a different draw stroke for irons or red dots. You shouldn't. It should be the same every time. And once you
Right.
learn what it takes to get the dot in the window, that's probably what you need to also have a better, more efficient presentation with irons. So I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Most
Randy,
shooters never developed truly. I mean, they got close, but it was get the gun out, then find the front sight. It was get the gun out,
yes.
then find the sight
Yep.
alignment. Get the gun
Yep.
out there, right? Well, now what they're doing with the red dot, what it caused them to do is the alignment is right when they get there.
Yes.
And it's a big difference in my
Yep.
opinion.
Absolutely. Randy, I want to talk a little bit about something. My first knowledge I had of you was I graduated SWAT school in 2003. And when I got back to work, my SWAT team leader gave me a big poster with a poem that you wrote called One Warrior's Creed. And that's sort of how I started to learn about you. Also, he was very much looked up to you. So he wanted us to be students of the game. So I knew a little bit about you and what you've done and stuff. But that poem is so poignant. Hopefully that's the right word for that. Can't spell check it. But tell us a little bit about that poem, how that came to be and
Yeah,
what
sure.
that means.
Yeah, so it was a little bit later in your career than that because I wrote that in 2007, coming out of Baghdad. So 2006, 2007, summer of 2006 to summer 2007, I was a counterterrorism advisor to the Iraqi National Counterterrorism Unit. I had a 11-person counterterrorism advisory team, worked directly with the National Command, the Iraqi National Command, Counterterrorism Command, and with the and it was the Ministry of Interior side. It was the law enforcement side, their National Counterterrorism Unit, the MOI Commandos. And 2006, 2007 was not a good time to be in Iraq. We were losing 50 to 60 Americans a month, 700 IEDs a day in Baghdad. I mean, it was astounding. And I lost some of my guys, and it paid there was just quite a toll to that. So when I lost the last guy that I lost just before I came home, Commander Phil Murphy Sweet from the Navy, he was killed by an Iranian-made EFP, explosively formed projectile, in a vehicle when our teams, our elements were on a movement when the teams got hit. And we lost 2 former SAS members and Commander Murphy Sweet in that same vehicle. So the mission was to support the movement of a British general and an American general to support do an inspection at the counterterrorism prison that was being built. And so the British general had former SAS guys, contractors, as his security detail. And then our general had us. One of our missions was to provide that. So we were trained in PSDs and that kind of stuff. So anyway, that death hit me pretty hard. It was the mission that we were on, the counterterrorism advisory mission was the Iraqis didn't want us. The Iraqis were using our training and our equipment to commit what we called extrajudicial killings. Baghdad was a nightmare. The war was not being fought well or led well. So we held a memorial one night for Phil and a young lady from the State Department who we often escorted to different places. she asked us, we're sitting around the table afterwards. She asked, "Why do you guys do this?" What do you mean? She says, "Why would anybody do this? What makes you guys do this?" And that question bothered me for a few days, because I thought about all the SWAT guys that I knew and had trained with and gone in harm's way with. And, two of my shootings were SWAT shootings. And all the military guys and all the special ops guys, that I'd been with, Green Berets and SEALs and Delta and Dev Group guys, and the things that we had done, British SAS, Australian SAS. And how would I define the character? Guys like you, how would I define, what motivates us? So I wrote, and at that time also, a couple of years before that, Stephanie Shugart, who was the widow of Randy Shugart, Medal of Honor recipient, Battle of Mogadishu, one of the two Delta guys that fast roped down to the helicopter to try and save the pilot, and was killed. And Stephanie Shugart had said, "It takes a real man to live a creed and not just say one." And so, kind of all these thoughts are spinning in my head. And so I wrote the creed, and it goes like this: "If today is to be the day, so be it. If you seek to do battle with me this day, you will receive the best that I am capable of giving. It may not be enough, but it will be everything I have to give, and it will be impressive, for I have constantly prepared myself for this day. I have trained, drilled, and rehearsed my actions so that I might have the best chance of defeating you. I have kept myself in peak physical condition, schooled myself in the martial skills, and become proficient in the application of combat tactics. You may defeat me, but you will pay a severe price and will be lucky to escape with your life. You may kill me, but I am willing to die if necessary. I do not fear death, for I've been close enough to it on enough occasions that it no longer concerns me. But I do fear the loss of my honor, and would rather die fighting than to ever have it said that I was without courage. So I will fight you, no matter how insurmountable it may seem, and to the death if need be, so that it might never be said of me that I was not a warrior." Well, as you know, it kind of went big in the SWAT world and in the military world. In fact, I used to go to conferences and have T-shirts and posters available for people, and I haven't done that in a few. All the shirts are gone, and there are a few posters around somewhere, and
well,
so
there's
on.
One
but
up here. Yeah, there's one up at my house too.
So,
and it may have
right.
been 2007 and not 2003, but anyway,
Yeah.
it's been up for a long time.
Yeah, and that, I think, the best people that I knew, the best cops prepared to deal with the worst situations, the best operators that I had the privilege of serving in combat with or in training with, because we trained far more than we ever served in combat, right? Even when the combat zone, we were constantly training to be ready for the next operation and so on. And so when I put that, I think it resonates. I think it talks truly to who we are, what we do, what our mindset is. I know you still keep yourself in good physical condition. I just turned 67 years old, and I'm in tremendous physical shape. I still roll 2 days a week. I still strike 2 days a week. I fire 20, 30,000 rounds a year, keeping my firearm skills up. I don't have to anymore. No one's paying me to do it, right? But
you live it.
I
man.
do fear. I do fear the loss of my honor, and I could not. If my community or my family needed me to be who God created, who God made me to be, if they knew me to be that, and I wasn't capable, I could not live with myself.
And I think you would be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't do that, because that's who you are. I mean, that's obviously clearly who you are. Randy, I know you have a lot of stuff going on. As we wind down here, let's talk about a few things that you have going on that people may be interested in. First of all, the thing that comes to mind is SimX, which is an ammunition company. Talk a little bit about what they do and your involvement with that. Yeah,
so SimX Ammunition started a number of years ago in my city, and they thought they had, the answer to terminal ballistics, issues and problems that we've all faced over the years, and a couple of their primary investors were good friends of mine, in particularly students of mine in the firearms world. And so SimX had come up with a high velocity munition with a very proprietary engineered cup with a proprietarily engineered and manufactured composite substance. So the 9mm round is coming out of the barrel at 2,200 feet per second. It's a 45 grain projectile, but it's producing a tremendous amount of energy. And more importantly, as a recent study showed, that energy is creating a ballistic pressure wave due to the rapid deceleration of that round when it strikes the target. That is just phenomenal. You can go to Simix Ammo, one word, simixammo.com, and learn about it. And they have a 45 round that's 72 grain coming out 1,800 feet per second, producing the same thing.
Yeah, I'm excited to check that stuff out, Randy.
Yeah,
you and I are going to
I'm bringing you some next week.
So. We're going to share a range soon,
yeah.
so I'll get my hands on that soon enough. Very interesting technology. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think rather than mushroom at the front of the bullet, this mushrooms at the rear. Is that right?
That's true. The way it's designed, instead of opening up from the front to the rear, that composite material is actually pushing it from the back faster than it's the slowing down of the front. And so it's mushrooming from rear to front. And it's creating, and you can go to the website and you can see the videos and stuff. And,
it's crazy to see those.
I think it's not a police duty round because it's not barrier neutral.
Yes.
But for a defensive round,
it's
what I carry in my guns.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I think that brings up a good misconception, and we're winding down here, Randy, but people think for personal defense, they want something that does ideal in the FBI testing protocol. Not necessarily. You know what I mean? You don't necessarily want that because you may not want that penetration from a personal defense standpoint. You want something that's going to probably penetrate less and expand more. So interesting there.
I want the threat to stop as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
And so I want, I jokingly sometimes talk about having seen a couple of guys hit overseas with 50 cal sniper rifles, and the threat ceases immediately. Well, we can't use, and of course the round carries on for a long ways, but you get my point. I would like to get that type of terminal bullet. If I need to end a problem, I'd like to end it there. And I think the Simix is the closest to doing it.
Very cool. And then what about your website where people can find more information about you? I know you provide training and consulting services.
Yeah, Warrior Creed, all one word, .us. They can go there for the private firearms training. SRWinc.us, which is the consulting side of my business. I'm at Gunsight 8 or 9 classes a year teaching at Gunsight in Paulden, Arizona. I believe Gunsight to be the finest instructional institution for the private citizen that has ever existed. We're the longest and the oldest.
Yes.
And it's just a phenomenal place. And
nothing like it.
Nothing like it, as you know, because you're there a lot filming stuff. And then I'm one of the owners of a company called the Power of Awareness Institute. It's based on a book by Dan Schilling, another special ops warrior, called The Power of Awareness. And it's about teaching people what awareness truly is. And people say they're aware, cops say they're aware all the time. They don't have a clue about what aware is, and then how to harness your intuition. mypoa.org. You can go there. You can listen to me for a minute, or you can listen to Dan. You can look at it. But we think that is the best thing that we could bring to the general citizenry who doesn't have the time, the desire, the resources to become a highly developed physical fighter, highly developed firearms enthusiast. If we can, and even those people, you can avoid most situations, right? It's if you're just aware and listen to your intuition. It's John Farnham's rules of stupid, right? Don't go to stupid places or stupid times or stupid people to do stupid things.
Yeah.
That will keep you out of trouble. But it's more than that. And people who think they understand situational awareness don't. This is what we train special operations warriors for lone operator missions, those kinds of things. It's a high level, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's an hour. It's 97 minutes of an online training course, and then you do these practical exercises. It's an awesome program.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. And, I think awareness is underrated because it's not fun to train awareness, right? No. It's not measurable. It's not tangible.
Not sexy.
It's not going out to the range and shooting.
Not tactical.
But I tell you, if you can have a guy who is way up here with awareness, even though his skills may be here, I think he's going to be better off than the other way around, right?
Well, you look at it from our world.
Yeah.
from the operator world, because I've done lone operator missions into foreign countries for once or twice in my career, right? If I have to go to hands-on, or I have to go to a blade, or I have to go to a gun in the places where I might have a gun, my chances of escaping and evading that situation go down dramatically.
Yep.
Law enforcement, everybody's going to be looking for me. If I can avoid the situation, we teach you in there how to conduct a surveillance detection route. If somebody is tracking you for a crime, we teach you how to lose them, right? Because if I'm trying to be, and I'm not a big fan of the term, but if I'm trying to be the gray man in this environment, right, I need skill sets other than hands-on firearms, skills that I need skills that don't draw attention to me.
Yes.
That just separate me from the environment. So that's what's in there, and it's good stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sitting down with us today, Randy. I really appreciate it. That's a wrap for this session with Randy Watt. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. We'll see you next time.